Welcome to Gowa program on personal income tax. Is it possible for an individual to be paying CIT, BIT, PIT?
I don't see how there could be element of multiple taxation because you are taxing different sources of income.
It mentions that cash crop, apples, oranges and cardamoms have been included, and betel nut, ginger, potatoes, which are equally lucrative, which are equally good, have not been included.
This is some cash crop thing that is being carried on a large scale, whereas the others are not on such a large scale.
But I think all these started from small scale.
One aspect that everybody mentions very clearly is the education allowance. I think there's a lot of emphasis on education in this country, and there are not many schools that can absorb so many children coming up, and yet the tax exemption is 50,000.
Why have a slab? Any Bhutanese educated outside is an asset to the country. He's going to come back to Bhutan more educated, more qualified, and he's going to contribute to society. He's going to contribute to nation building, which is what PIT is all about.
Kuzambo, welcome to Goa program on personal income tax. To discuss the subject with me, I have Amsangizam, Joint Director, Department of Revenue and Customs, Tashi Ugin Sechap, Vice Chairman, Single Group of Companies, Sewang Tashi, Regional Revenue Customs Office, Kelifo. Now, this is a subject that has been on for more than 2 years, more than 3 years. Many people are concerned with this, and correctly so, because this is happening for the first time in this country. And for those of you who may not be very familiar with this, this is an act, a copy of the act passed by the National Assembly in its 79th session, and this is applicable from January 1, 2002 onwards. Now, those of you who want to know more in detail can have this book with the regional offices of the Revenue and Customs. In order for us to understand PIT better, the objective of this session would be to try to understand the PIT and make it more smooth in implementing. And since this is already a law, there's not much that we need to discuss about the virtues of it. The discussion would focus on trying to understand, trying to clarify the various aspects, the formalities, the penalties, the requirements and methods of conforming to this law. So in order for us to better understand, let's start with the basic question of what is PIT. And for this, I request Amsangi to spend maybe half a minute or 1.5 minutes on what PIT is all about.
Thank you, Karma. PIT is a tax on income that you earn from your personal income that you earn from the 6 sources, namely salary income, rental income from real property, interest income from fixed deposits, dividend income from shareholdings, cash crop income, cash crop meaning only orange, apple and cardamom, then income from other sources which includes hire from privately owned vehicles and plant, machinery, intellectual property rights.
Now, all of us are wondering why PIT now? Why didn't we have 5 years ago? Why don't we have 5 years from now? Can someone, either Amsangi or Chong, tell the general public why we are having this PIT in 2002?
Well, actually the proposal to introduce PIT we have been working on for the last 5 years. It's not an overnight decision. And I think why it did not happen earlier is keeping in mind the administrative capability and also looking at the income level of the public. I think we have come a long way since then, and also given the fact that a lot of our public expenditure is being met through donor assistance, I think it is very important for us, when you talk about self-reliance, that we should be able to mobilize our own adequate internal resources to meet the ever-increasing expenditure on the social sector.
One of the reasons for having this in 2002 is Amsangi says that income levels have gone up, and our capability to implement this tax has also improved. I would request Ashuki Sejak whether, in his observation, this could be correct or not.
I think my opinion on PIT is actually totally different. In fact, the question raised by our mediator, Karma, the question was, why did it start now and not 5 years later and 5 years before? In fact, my question would have been, why did it start at all? So therefore, for me to delve into this and to answer would not be in keeping with the way I think.
We have been informed that even in last week's council there was a write-up which says that there are a lot of uncleared taxes. The issues with regard to CIT and BIT, the certificates issued from the revenue customs were in the form of provisional certificates. Now, there is a feeling that if we cannot sort out what is already at hand, such as BIT and CIT, how will we take on this extra burden? From your experiences in Gelifo, managing that region, what do you think about this?
Well, if I take my experience in Gelifo, I wouldn't be able to really answer that, because Gelifo, we don't really have outstandings. But I have worked in Thimphu regional office as well before I left for Gelifo. I mean, the BIT and CIT outstandings that we have, those are actually, I think our tax authorities, the way we deal with things, we hadn't really developed that much at the time. But now we have come to a stage where we understand our problems, and a lot of these outstandings have been cleared during the last 2-3 years. And it's mostly been because of things that piled up before we reached that level. So I don't really foresee a problem at the field stage on taking over PIT as well. Anyway, we have different sections which deal with PIT, and then another section that deals with BIT, and our own respective sections.
So then we have to understand that each region has its own sections, divisions looking after PIT, CIT, BIT. Now, is it possible that with this so much emphasis on PIT, the other two taxes could be ignored or getting less attention?
I don't really think so. And I think it's just because PIT is something that's come up right now that it's getting a lot of attention. But from the tax authority's point of view, it's not, the other two taxes are not going to become less important just because of PIT.
My question to the two ladies from Revenue and Customs is that why did, if the target of having the slab was to, one of the reasons was to narrow the gap between the rich, so-called rich, and the so-called poor. Now, what we had suggested from the very beginning, from the private sector, was that if you want to start taxing the people, to let the people be involved in the development of the nation, and also you want to make sure that the disparity doesn't increase, why don't you increase the slab? In fact, we had suggested that the slab should be actually at 500,000. Starting slab should be at 500,000. So this is one of the questions I wanted to raise. Why start at 100,000? Why can't it be increased to, say, 500,000? That is the first one. The second one about the when you introduce PIT, that it may increase economic efficiency. You know, when you put taxes, if the practices of the business community and the private sector has been very forthcoming, for example, the CIT and the BIT, if the practices of the people paying taxes had been let's say straightforward. I have to pay 10, I pay 10. I have to pay 20, I pay 20. Where they don't have to, say I have to pay 10, how do I now decrease it down to 2 or 1? If it wasn't there, then I would definitely agree that even introducing PIT will improve economic efficiency, the practices of the people, how to save, how to budget, all that will come in. But then I think now a lot of more time is going to be spent by the people on how do I now, avoid paying less tax, avoid paying tax. And I don't think that's very constructive. In fact, there's going to be a lot of wastage of time using, your time to try and evade taxes which the government is trying to impose. And on the administration, on the first 4, on salary, rental, interest and dividends, I don't see any problem. Because on the salary and rental, it's deduction at source, which I don't know whether other countries practice that or not, but in Bhutan, we deduct at source, which does make the job of the revenue and customs much, much easier. On cash crops and on hiring and consultancy, that's where you're going to have a lot of problems, because private people lend to private people, and cash crops also, the negotiations are held between private and private people. So how do you determine what it was sold at, what was the income generation? So these are the problems that will crop up, and I don't know whether the administration is set up to geared up for that. On the other 4, yes, because it's deduction at source, so it gives you an idea.
So, Sangi, we will discuss the slab later on, slab as well as the exemption. But the immediate question where Dasho mentioned about how you would determine and minimize tax planning. Dasho used tax evasion. I think tax planning is more appropriate. So how do we mitigate tax planning with regard to all these logistical elements?
Well, Tashu mentioned that we would not have much problems with salary, rental, interest, dividend, but we may have some problems with cash crop and income from other sources. Income from other sources also comes under tax deduction at source. So it's only higher between private individuals that is not covered. So there also we will not have a problem. But with regard to cash crops and also with other sources, it's not like as if we are depending only on tax deduction at source. We are also in the process of gathering information. We have gone to land records, we have gone to the city corporations, we have gone to to the companies to get information on all the land holdings. And so basically when a taxpayer files in his return, then we will be referring to those information that we already have. And one thing I would like to mention here is that the responsibility of correct declaration lies on the taxpayer, not the tax administration. Our job is just to ensure that the information that we are gathering, we will use it as a reference. When the taxpayer files in his return, then at the end of the return, there's also a declaration that he makes. He says that whatever I have mentioned here is true to the best of my knowledge, and I will be liable for any fines and penalties. And I think the fines and penalties, which will be probably covered later, will act as a deterrent, and hopefully people will declare correctly.
I would like to know whether this deduction at source is done by all countries, or is it only Bhutan that is trying to carry this out?
Actually, deduction at source is very common all over the world. In India, even in the most developed countries, they also call it pay as you earn. Like salary tax, salary income is normally the employer's responsibility to deduct and remit the tax to tax authorities. It's not something new, and it is also one of the most efficient ways of collecting taxes with the least cost. And then you also have evasion is it's difficult to evade when it comes under TTS, because the responsibility is on the person who is making the payment.
Good. Now, shall we then move to the next related issue Dasho raised? We'll get to the cash crops just before this, but I just want to add in with regard to the tax planning, where things are, the incomes are not structured, such as salary and so on. So I would believe that it would be in the interest of the person who is paying to have it declared, because he would want those exemptions. Now, there are cases where Dashu raised a very interesting issue. There may be a lot of work going behind planning these taxes where it is possible, such as unstructured and irregular businesses. But even within that, I would believe that it would be in my interest as a person who is paying tax to declare, because I would be getting that exemption myself. If I don't declare it, I will lose that exemption also. Therefore, the taxpayers would find it a suboptimal step not to declare these taxes, because you would earn the exemption. If you don't declare, you neither declare the income, not exemption. Therefore, if you're caught, then there are consequences to it. But having said that, on the cash crop, Dashu has raised this cash crop, and we have a lot of emails regarding the cash crop on the tax on cash crops. We believe that the law mentions, I don't know whether the law is exhaustive or just illustrative, but it mentions that cash crop, apples, oranges, and cardamoms have been included, and betel nut, ginger, potatoes, which are equally lucrative, which are equally good, have not been included. What is this? Is there something missing here? So,
I think we had chosen these three, oranges, apples, and cardamom, because this is a cash crop thing that is being carried on a large scale, whereas the others are not on such a large scale. And for the moment, we cover only these three under cash crops now.
so that means very clearly that income from potatoes and ginger will not be taxed.
No.
I see. So now going back to my one other concern is, having taken more than 2 years to 3 years to study this tax and implement them, what do you think would be the net contribution from this PIT to the government revenue, number one? Number two, what portion of population do you think would come under this tax bracket?
Well, it's a very approximate figure that we have is, I think during the 9th 5-year plan, I mean, it's a very conservative figure that we have. It's, during the 9th plan, we hope to generate about 658 million from PIT. And with regard to coverage, maybe 5% of the population.
5%. So then is this 95% of the people are going to out of the bracket of this tax? Then from an economic management tool point of view, does this policy justify to be in place just to handle 5% of the population?
Well, I suppose you have to start with 5%, and hopefully we will move on from there and maybe perhaps reach 70% like some of the developed countries.
Is
we
there
have to start somewhere.
Okay, is there a time plan? Is there a timeline during which you would say, okay, we will probably estimate to have 5% coverage, and then probably next 5 years down the road, because all that I would assume is a function of income, function of your disposable income, function of how the country is doing, isn't it?
Well, yes, that will, whether it is, I mean, the 5% figure will grow and increase over the years will depend largely on the economic growth.
I'd like to know whether this 650 million is a result of a very high exemption limit, or is it because generally the income levels in country are relatively low?
I think the basic exemption that we have is very high as compared to most countries in the region. The highest we know, I think it's close to 60,000 milgrams, and we are going, we are at 100,000, which is more than 4 times the per capita income. Our per capita income is $555, and the basic exemption that we have is too high. Our initial proposal that we had was 50,000. But based on the feedback that we got during the workshops that we had recommended that it be enhanced.
Okay, so that takes us to a very important exemption limit of 100,000. Now, here I have 2 questions. Number one, what is the basis, in economics we call it index of ability to pay? How did you arrive at 100,000? And what is the possibility of this being further revised in the future? We will get to that second question later on. But within this, the first question, exemption limit of 100,000, what are the indicators, what are the variables, the reasons that have been used at arriving at 100,000?
Well, one, we looked at the per capita income And the other one was prior to the introduction of PIT, we had a basic, we had an exemption limit for salary tax, 48,000 nultrams per year. And that was set in 1992. So what we did was we indexed it, took the inflation and all that, and then brought it up to 1999 levels. And it came to about 78,000 something. So then we rounded it off to 100,000. That's how we arrived at basic exemption of 100,000.
Tasha, would you agree with Amsange's contention that 100,000 is very high compared to rest of the, as a ratio of your per capita income?
See, my understanding from the very first discussions that we've had with the ministry and with the department, and at least what they told us, was that the reason why they having PIT is so that there can be a sense of involvement of the people in the development process, and also because they don't want the gap, the disparity between the rich and the poor to increase. Now, if this is the case, then I don't agree with this 100,000 limit, because then we at 100,000 we're trying to get as many people as possible. Okay, if we had gone down lower, we can get more. Maybe the figure would have increased from 658 to maximum 700 million. My view is that the slab should have been much higher. If you want to tax the rich, okay, tax only the rich. You know, go up to 500,000. Forget about the ones who earn 100,000, 200,000 a year. Let's tax the rich. It starts a practice, and slowly, as the country gets richer, as the people start earning more, and when they reach that level of 500,000, they start getting taxed.
Actually, the question of whether it's adequate, inadequate, it's a highly debatable issue. Because for some, what is adequate? Basic exemption is given to ensure a comfortable standard of living, we say, to take care of your house, the basic needs, your housing, your clothing, and your food. And it's a highly contentious issue because it differs from person to person, from family to family. It differs from the size of the family, the type of lifestyle you have, where you are located. You know, because in Thimphu, 100,000 may seem very low, but if you go into the interiors, people may not even see, leave alone 100,000, they may not even see 10,000.
Right now we have 100,000 as the exemption limit. What would be, is there a mechanism whereby it would adjust? Sangi just mentioned about indexing to inflation. Is there a mechanism, automatic mechanism, whereby this basic minimum exemption would be adjusted to reflect the cost of living in the country?
No, there are certain things that are clearly specified in the Act that we cannot amend without, we cannot change without going back, to the National Assembly. Like things like rates, basic exemptions, sources of income to be taxed, recovery measures, fines and penalties. Those are things that are clearly mentioned in the Act. So all it basically has a policy implication. So all policy is covered in the Act, and I don't think we can change. But when it comes to procedural and implementation, then the Act authorizes the Ministry of Finance to frame rules and regulations.
I see. Let's get a little more specific then. 100,000 is fixed, is in the Act, and therefore to make it 200,000, it has to go to National Assembly. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Okay. Now, given this understanding, having brought this subject in, within this Act, what are the authorities within which the Ministry of Finance can act, can regulate, can amend, and what are the, you have just mentioned briefly, we would like to take maybe a little more time in listening to the application of the Act on the nationwide, meaning what is the limit, what are the areas within which the Department of Revenue and Customs can make changes. After that, what are the limits, what are the areas within which Ministry of Finance can make changes, amendments, and then ultimately what are the areas that have to go to the National Assembly for amendment.
So basically what the Act covers is the obligations and the rights of the taxpayer, and then the authority that the tax administration has. Okay, and then through the Act, it also authorizes the Ministry of Finance to frame rules on procedural aspects. Like we cannot change filing dates, but we have the authority to extend filing dates. We can also broaden the coverage of tax deduction at source, Like we have just now only five sources which come under TDS. We can also, if you feel that, because tax deduction at source is basically not a final tax, it's just an advance tax, a preliminary tax. Therefore, the Ministry of Finance has the authority to broaden the coverage of TDS.
Good. Then we are still not yet done with exemption. One very important issue. We have a lot of emails from a lot of our concerned taxpayers, and by the letters that we have, they are very positive about PIT, and I guess just because it's already a law. One aspect that everybody mentions very clearly is the education allowance. I think there's a lot of emphasis on education in this country, and there are not many schools that can absorb so many children coming up. And yet the tax exemption is 50,000. If you want to be very serious about supporting education, this 50,000 don't seem to, it seems to be a halfway house. You cannot educate a child with 50,000 outside Bhutan and forget educating more than one child. So what do you have to say on that? And Dashogan, I don't know how you feel about it also.
My thoughts on education is why have a slab? Any Bhutanese educated outside is an asset to the country. He's going to come back to Bhutan more educated, more qualified, and he's going to contribute to society. He's going to contribute to nation building, which is what PIT is all about in the very first place. If a person is a brilliant engineer, and the government scholarships only cover certain universities, and he wants to go to a different one where he has to pay himself, and if his parents are willing to pay for it, why not encourage that? Why do we have to restrict it to 50,000 per child?
If the expenditure is within Bhutan, yes, it's easy to cross-verify. But when the expenditure is incurred outside, then you may be going on a holiday and you could book it as an education allowance. So that is something that we do not want the tax system to encourage. Let me make this clear. The education allowance that is given does not restrict the parents from sending your child to school. You have a choice. It's just that you have a benefit up to 50,000 nultrams. But that does not mean that you have to incur only 50,000. If you really want to send your child outside to a good school because you know the benefits are good, then I think you should do it.
Well, I think there are large sections of the population who are concerned with this. And anything that is good for the general public should be taken into consideration when you frame an economic policy such as tax. Now, I really don't know whether this particular concern is very unreasonable or it distorts the people's willingness to pay taxes, but I believe that going by the concern, number of people who are concerned, and we have 6 pages of email, and each page has the same question by many people. Therefore, I think it's an issue that we should keep in mind. That's why I raised the issue of how much can the Ministry of Finance amend. Before we go to the other taxes, I believe we take a small break. Okay, welcome back to our Goa program on PAT. We are discussing several issues, one of which now at hand is the education allowance. I think we have discussed this to the extent that it needs discussion. Now we move on to the next issue of multiple taxes. We have, as we discussed, to begin with CIT, corporate income tax, business income tax, and now personal income tax. The concern on some of the taxpayers' minds is that is it possible for an individual to be paying CIT, BIT, PIT, and therefore is that a dual tax or a multiple tax? Is it possible that the individual would have to pay all these 3 taxes in 1 year?
I don't see how there could be an element of multiple taxation because you are taxing different sources of income. Corporate income tax is only on profits, net profit that you earn from company. Business income tax is only from tax on income that you earn from business. And personal income tax is tax on income on other personal income that is not covered under BIT.
Now, supposing I'm a proprietary company, and say this year my company makes 1 million profit. Now, on that 1 million, I have to pay the revenue and customs 30%. On my net, I have to pay 30%. So that means 0.3 million goes to the government. Now, on that 0.7 million which is left behind, is that treated as personal income, or is that treated now as my income, is the business income?
Are you incorporated under the
No,
Companies
no.
Act? You're
No,
not.
proprietary.
Then no, you're not liable for
I'm not liable
personal
for-
because you have already paid
Okay.
business income tax.
Okay,
There.
that's one. The other one is on the corporation now. On the corporation declares profit. From the profit, it declares dividends. Now, the dividend is taxable.
Yes, sir.
So that isn't that a double taxation?
It is not double taxation because here the legal entity comes in. The company is one legal entity and the shareholder is another legal entity. But say if I have shareholdings in a company, then that does not mean that I can sign on behalf of the company because we are two separate legal entities.
No, but then like all these are very technical terms, but I see it as one. The corporation makes a profit. On that profit, they've already given taxes to the government. Now, what is left over, they're sharing it amongst the shareholders. Now, once it's shared amongst the shareholders, again, the shareholders have to pay. It's very similar to the business income tax, except that in the business income tax, he's already paid his tax, and what is left over is only left for him. So he doesn't have to pay a dividend on that.
It's very different. Because as a business, if you are a proprietor, then you have unlimited liability. You know, as a business, if you borrow money, then and if you default on that, the whole business, becomes liable. Whereas as a shareholder, I am liable only to the extent of the shares I hold in the company. If the company goes bankrupt, that doesn't mean that I have to take on all the debts of the company. I'm only limited to that extent. So there's a huge difference. When you talk about legal entity, there's a vast difference in interpretation. And also, of course, what you say is something that is, it's an issue that is discussed all over the world. People do say that taxing dividend amounts to double taxation, but the decision has always been that companies and shareholders are separate legal entities. Therefore,
But then why not let the company pay the tax on the dividend then? This is the practice carried out in India at least.
Used to be, not anymore now. With the new budget, they have now included dividend as part of personal income. And the equity issue comes in when you talk about taxing it, making the corporate pay. Whether you're earning 1,000 or you're earning 100 million, you still pay the same percentage. So that equity is not there.
No, because what I look at when we look at Bhutan, in most countries when you're talking about corporations, you're talking about shareholders who really don't depend on the dividend to make an income. They trade their shares, and that's a capital gain. So, but here in Bhutan, because of the way the corporations are structured and the way they declare their dividends, there is no trading, and therefore everyone depends on that. So, don't you think the situation here and elsewhere is a little different, and that maybe we should look at also in that respect, we should look at the dividend income also as in a little different way?
I think given the way our companies are structured and the way dividends are being declared, all the more reason to tax that source. Because what happens when you would also like the company, you want the company to expand, to create reserves, but when you take out in dividend, then it does not encourage expansion, nor does it encourage creation of reserves.
I suppose this short discussion that we had enabled some of our audiences to better understand PIT. Now, once we try to understand some aspects of it, I guess very exhaustive, far bigger here. Now, within this, since it is already a law, what are the fines? And I've heard that in other countries you can go to jail for that. So I really don't know how the penalties are built into our act. If Sangi or so.
I think one thing we need to clarify here, fines and penalties are not in place to raise revenue, but is to encourage compliance. And depending on the type of offences, we do have fines ranging from 100 nultrams per day and then it can lead also to prosecution and imprisonment. It can also lead to property being seized, and we also have along with the fines, we also have recovery measures where a taxpayer has ignored or has not complied with our notices, or is delinquent. Then we can even go to the extent of attaching property and disposing of them.
It will be through the due process of law, though.
Yes, actually this part is a very sensitive part, so it has been it's covered in great detail in the Act.
I see. So then, before we close this, I would again urge our audience to read the Act very carefully. And I understand the Revenue and Customs have set up infrastructure to educate our taxpayers all over the country, and to visit them, talk to them, and get their brochure now.
Yes, I think our mediator is going to close off without...
No, I'm coming to that.
The cash crops.
Okay, that's okay.
Because the cash crop one, our mediator had asked the representatives from the Revenue Customs only about why orange and potatoes and all are not included. I question why only 3 items were included in the cash crop. Is it because people are making money out of it, that this has been targeted as one of the crops that have been targeted for tax? My main reason for arguing with the department on a cash crop, that cash crop should not be taxed, is that when you look at cash crops, we can also call it farming. It is getting a product from the earth. Here we're talking about job employment, job generation. Right now, the oranges, orange orchards, apple orchards, cardamom places are like, they just let run wild. But slowly with, we're all aware that WTO is coming in, India, very soon Bangladesh and all the other countries are going to be signatories to the WTO. It would mean that they're going to get products flooded in from the rest of the world. Now, if we are very complacent about cash crops, our people are making a lot of money, let's tax them. I think that later on we're going to face a lot of problems. In fact, we should try and develop cash crops as one way of employing and generating income for our business people. Looking at it as a product and trying to help the farmers, people who are students who are not getting jobs, to come into this type of work. But to target, this is where the person is making money, let's tax him. A potato is okay, the farmers are doing potatoes. Though it's sold outside, it's still a cash crop. But since the farmers are doing it, let's not tax it. A ginger, okay, it's something that the farmers are doing, let's not tax it. It goes very negative sometimes when we view that the segregation of certain crops to certain crops.
Thank you.
Okay, Tashir called it farming, I would call it commercial farming. And another thing is, I think when it comes to whether decisions, when it comes to choices as to whether you want to invest or not invest in cash crops, I think tax would be neutral to a decision like that, because if the returns are good, whether there's a tax or no tax, people will still go ahead and invest. Because people will not go blindly and invest in something just because it's taxed. I think more than the tax is the returns that that you would get from your investment. So I don't think that would greatly influence the decision. And then you talk about cash crops returns. Now, when you look at, again, the equity issue comes in. When you look at BIT, you have people who are doing business in remote areas. They pay 500 nultrams per month, as tax. I mean, people who may be earning 20 to 30,000 a year, they have to pay a minimum tax of 500 nultrams. And then you talk about people who are earning in millions, and you say, okay, because you want to promote this, you should not tax. I don't think that's having a very equitable tax system.
We have tried to cover as many issues as possible, and I understand that from this last question itself, there are many more issues to be discussed. Now, in order for us to close this discussion, I would request all my colleagues, panelists here to maybe say a few words. And
I would request taxpayers to give us this one chance, once it's implemented, to see whether it's really a bad thing or if maybe it works out for the better. So I think equally for us as well, we should be given a chance. And then if it proves to be good, then we should go ahead with it.
thank you.
Well, one thing what I would like to mention here is tax is not something that is static, it is dynamic. It has to keep evolving, changing, depending on the, depending on the, the performance of the economy. And I'm sure definitely once after the first year of implementation, we will definitely look at all the feedback that we have got and compile and submit our report.
To debate on whether we should have or we shouldn't have PIT, it's a little late now because it's already a law, and we have no choice but to abide by the law.
Thank you. Well, personally for me as a moderator, it has been a privilege to listen to various aspects of tax, and it's been very enlightening. And before I close off, I would like to thank especially these people who have sent us your comments. Kishore Thapa from Gelifo, Pema Chanzam from Drugyar Paro, Pasang Doji from Finseling, Rajan from Samsi, and Cheong Doji from Dampu. And there are many more such comments. We have not been able to pick all of them. I'd like to request all our audience here to get back to us at, if you have any questions on this particular program or any programs with BBS, we have a particular email here, guwahati@bbs.com.bt. And we would be very happy to receive your comments and work on them. Now, before I formally close this, I also I've been told that next topic on Goa would be on the RICB, Royal Insurance Corporation's policies and premiums, so and so. Now, even in that on that subject, should you have any comments, do let us know at the same address that I have mentioned. And from all of us here, thank you very much for watching Goa, and please do keep watching. These are very important issues, I guess, and it touches all of us. And if you have any comments, any education, any information, do go after the right people in the revenue and here at the BBS. Thank you very much.